I made the statement, the bold statement, that Rathalos Blademaster was the best daily login champion, the free login champions that Raid have ever released. Now, I may have been overconfident or overzealous when I saw his kit, getting overexcited, and potentially he's not substantially the best one. You know, he's not maybe like far and above. It's a fair assessment to say that champions like Ninja are very, very powerful, although I would say with the latest stat bloat, and the way that you can empower champions and build champions with all these ascension gears and all the chaos dust, it's much easier to deal damage to bosses by just doing direct damage than it is by burning them. The only real area where we still have to resort to a burn is pretty much Sand Devil, unless you can actually run the double newt. But even then, you can still run double newt. He's fallen off quite a lot because of that. We also have champions like Artak, pretty much a great universal HP burner activator. Fair to say that he is also very good. The reason why I never include Ultimate Death Knight in my lists is because the champion is so awful for the arena meta. He's traumatized me so much that I really just hope that I never have to see the Ultimate Death Knight's face again. So it's a biased opinion. I know it's not accurate and factual. You can criticize me as much as you want in the comments, but I really just despise Ultimate Death Knight. I don't think he was a good addition for the game. But the reason why I was really excited about Rathalos Blademaster is purely his damage potential and early game access. So we've got this ability here. Attacks one enemy. Each second use of this skill will also attack all enemies instead. So it's a 3-turn cooldown. Every other turn is going to be an AoE. Every other turn is going to be single. So it means it's like a 6-turn cooldown AoE, 6-turn cooldown single. And then it's going to ignore 25% of the target's defense. However, if he's attacking a boss, he's instead going to ignore all of the defense. Now, true damage is one of the most powerful features in the game. That's why a lot of people like to get the area bonuses from Live Arena with ignore defense as quickly as possible, because if you have someone like Krutraxa, right? Krutraxa over here in the Demon Spawn faction, she already on her A1 ignores 50% of the target's defense. So when you add in 20% from area bonuses, that gets you to 70%. When you add in Savage Cruel, you're now doing true damage, which means that this A1 actually hits incredibly hard. So reaching true damage, not just like 20% ignore defense, 30% ignore defense, or even as deep as 50% ignore defense, hitting true damage is the key thing here. So this already screams very powerful. We also get an unresistible decreased defense on a boss. So pretty much killing a boss, even when you're not using this A2 for everyone else in your team, is going to be much easier. He doesn't require accuracy, so you can put him in a pure attack banner for more damage, right? You don't have to substitute your damage for accuracy. We also have a increased speed, increased crit damage. The increased crit damage is important when we look at what we're going to do. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is I'm theoretically going to show you why I am saying he is incredibly good as a login champion, because I'm going to show you the mathematical potential of his A2 ability. What we are going to do, though, is later this evening. This video is going out, I'm recording it the day before, but this video is going out on the day that we are going to get him for the first time, right? If you've logged in from day one, you'll get him at midnight in UTC. I'm going to be streaming from 11 p.m. tonight, and we are going to play test him to the nth degree. I'm going to build him straight away. I'll mastery him. We'll just burn all our resources. Hopefully I'll have books available to it. Don't tell my clan. They're going to be really upset with me, but I'm burning CVC resources early because we're going to put him into clan boss. We'll put him into Hydra. We're going to put him into every dungeon. I'm going to show you in practicalities how the math is going to work. But in this video, I want to give you the theoretical, where the math and damage is going to come from, because I think a lot of people will use this champion and go, he does no damage. And then the next person is going to show a screenshot of him doing insane damage, and they're going to go, how the hell do you get him doing so much damage? And that's why this video is important, because the main thing is his passive. He's going to inflict 50% more damage against targets and HP burn, and he's going to receive 25% less. So he has a built-in strengthen. That is very powerful. It means that he's going to be able to be much more glass cannon and still do damage, because this 25% will stack with Duchess passive. It will stack with Strengthen buff. It will stack with Pythian passive. It will stack with any sort of things that reduces incoming AoE damage. It's not just on its own, it can be stacked with other things. But even after that, he's still got more. Every fifth ability that he uses, every fifth skill, a bit like Gwendolyn, every third time she takes a turn, she takes an extra turn. This guy instead is going to deal 200% more damage. So if you put counterattack in your team, or ally attack, or joint attack, or if he has revenge sets or retaliation sets, he will trigger this passive from those attacks. So you can artificially speed up this fifth skill counter, because every time he counterattacks, that's using A1. That's considered a skill usage. Every time he joins an attack, an ally attack, he's using the A1. That's considered a skill usage. So you can actually artificially reduce this to 4. If you consistently do ally attack every turn, well, it's going to be every 4 skills because he doesn't have to take that extra turn. So that's very powerful. 200% more. We already get 50% more. He does have a 30% aura as well. So let me show you why I'm so excited about this champion, okay? Let me show you in detail. So I have got a spreadsheet here with all the different components that we're going to be looking at. We've got multipliers here. I'm going to reset them all right now so that we know exactly how much we can scale this entire, his skill set. So here's a base attack of 1487. Now I've got a new algorithm that determines what I would consider a standard way to scale him in 2024. This is a base model algorithm that we will be using for all of our damage ratings, which I hope that I can finish actually completing the work on that in the next week. Obviously, the free-to-play series has started, and we had all these new champions and Cintrano, so it's kind of taken away a little bit of the time me fixing the damage ratings. But we have a new algorithm that takes into account all the benefits of different stats, like empowerment, ascension, blessing, all these different stats now we can acquire. It takes them and basically builds out what an average build should look like for a decent champion. Now, obviously, not everyone will be able to achieve these things. We're going to change the numbers and actually show you how even if you have a smaller build, it's still very strong. But this is just a good base of damage, right? This is a good way of kind of scaling a champion. Every single champion that I will put in the damage ratings when we actually return those damage ratings back to the website will have the same build, the same sort of equation. It all scales off their base attack. Now at 1487, it's actually quite low for a base attack. We like to see things above 1500, but it still means that in an average build here, it's going to return something like 6705 attack, give or take. I always like to give someone a base of 250% crit damage in today's era. If you get a little bit of awakening on him, get him to a 4-star, get different things, that these things are easy to acquire. There's now 32% crit damage just available on Artifact Ascension. And now that we have got Chaos Dust, it's much easier to sort of force that. It still requires a bit of grinding, but you can force the stats you want on your good pieces. Now, we are going to give ourselves a 30% crit damage buff because he uses his A3. So that means he's actually going to be on 280% crit damage all the time as an advantage. The skill we are going to be focusing on is his A2, the one that does true damage. That is the one we really want to focus on. Now that has a multiplier, whether it's single target or AoE, of 4 times attack. I originally thought we would have something like a 6 times attack single target and then a much weaker AoE. That's what happens with Roxanne. When Roxanne attacks a single target, the multiplier is significantly higher than when Roxanne attacks an AoE, which is why Roxanne is very undesirable for clan boss, because she veils herself and then you lose damage. It's very annoying. You'd much prefer not to veil yourself and keep the single target. He's going to attack 1 time, so we just want 1 singular attack. And I'm going to use his aura here. He's got a 30% attack aura, so we're going to buff that. So what we can do is we can multiply all these things together. You can see I can take his attack value. I can give him an attack buff, so that he has a 1.5 times attack. We can add 30% of his base stats in here as well, so that we can actually, let's just update that formula there. Now, we can actually take his base stat and give him a bonus of 30%, and we can add that in. So his actual attack, when he is buffed, should be about 12,956. That's when he's sitting with an attack buff, which means when we apply the multiplier here, which is his base attack with 4 times, with 1 times, we're going to have a raw hit of 51,826. Okay, so what I want to do now is show you how these damage calculations are going to work, specifically for Hydra. So when we're attacking Hydra, there's a few things we need to take into account. Firstly, we don't care about difficulty with Rathalos. He's ignoring defense. Most of the time when you see Trunders and attack-based champions, they fall off as you get to like Brutal and Nightmare because the enemies have a lot higher defense. So it's much harder to get your raw damage output that you would really like. Obviously, a very giga-charged like Kraken Trunder can do absolutely work, like it can work in Nightmare. But for the average player, you can't really take someone like your Foley or your single target damage dealers outside of really niche, very powerful legendary or epic heroes like Whisper into Nightmare and expect them to do the work. But in this case, we can, because he's going to ignore the defense. So the difficulty of the boss doesn't really matter. It's all about keeping him alive, which is a different topic. But if you can keep him alive, he will do the damage similarly if he's on the highest level to the lowest level. There's not going to be any difference. The other thing we need to take into account is every other attack of his A2 is going to be AoE. Now, all the Hydra heads have an inbuilt damage reduction for AoE damage. Now, when the Suffering head is not out, this is actually going to be significantly lower because it's going to be 0.1 times 0.1 times 0.1 times 0.1, right? So you're going to have 4 instances where damage is going to get reduced by the actual damage reduction here. So you can see that actually we will lose 34.39%. So when we AoE attack without the Suffering Head out, we will lose 34% of that damage. But with the Suffering Head in, one of those needs to be a 30% reduction because the Suffering Head reduces AoE damage by 30%. So it's actually going to be 48.9. So we've just rounded this up to 49% here. So we need to take that into account when we're calculating that damage, that anything that we do needs to be reduced based on these numbers. So with all that in mind, using just our base damage of 51,826. So let's attack the Hydra Head on a single target basis. We're not going to put any multipliers. We're not going to book him. We're not going to give him masteries. We're not going to give him weaken, HP burn, his 5th skill, decapitation, fury set. Nothing that you can do to scale damage here. We are just going to put him absolutely raw in this build. He's going to deal 51,826 raw. We're going to multiply that first with the crit damage. And that is going to give us 196,000 as a single hit so far. We've hit a boss with nothing for 196,000. Now, if you have Hex on all your enemies, then all other enemies are going to take 10% of that damage. Now, if you don't know how Hex works, I'll just give you a quick TLDR. Hex is a component that will receive damage if an enemy takes damage. So when I attack an enemy, 10% for single target abilities is sent to all other enemies under Hex. Not the one you attack, but only all other enemies. If you're attacking AoE, then 2% of that is transferred to all other enemies. So in this instance here, when I attack a single target, I'm going to be dealing 196,000. So 19,694 is going to get placed on all the other Hex targets. Now in Hydra, you can have up to 4 hexes on a target, but we can't take it from the first one. So essentially we're multiplying our Hex by 3. So the actual single target total damage towards your boss counter in just this build alone, no multipliers at all, he's already hitting for 256,000, whether he's hitting Nightmare, Brutal, Hard, or Normal. All you need is increased attack on him and his self buff for increased crit damage, and he is in the lead. So let's switch it first to an AoE, and let's look at the worst case scenario. Well, the worst case scenario for his AoE, because the Suffering Head is out, we're going to reduce our damage quite a lot, by 50% nearly. We're actually going to hit for 100,000 damage instead. And then because it is AoE, we're going to hit 100,000 across the board because there's no damage reduction. So every head is going to take the same amount of damage. There is a damage scale here, so it could be 10% higher or 10% lower. This is on the 0%, right? You can high roll or low roll. There's basically a 10% interval up or down on 1%. So it rolls when you fight. So it'll take this 100,000 and it will either boost it by 9%, 8%, 7%, or it could drop it by 8%, 7%. We work on a 0% basis here. So when I attack one enemy, it's going to be 100,000. So because I'm attacking all other enemies, I'm ignoring all their defenses. It should linearly, equally damage them depending on that 10% scale. So let's just assume every single one gets 0%. We're going to do in one hit 401,988. But we've got Hex, but this is an AoE ability. So instead of dealing 10%, we're going to do 2% of that damage, which is about 2,010 damage. But because we're attacking every single enemy, we're actually applying the Hex 4 times. So we're attacking one enemy, that's doing Hex to every single other enemy. Then we're attacking the next enemy, that's doing Hex to all the other enemies. You're doing it 4 times. So instead of getting 3 components of Hex, we're going to get 12. So we actually walk away with 24,000. So one single AoE in the worst possible setup for Hydra, which is when there's a Suffering Head out, is going to deal 426,000 to your overall Hydra boss damage without any multipliers, buffs, books, anything at all. We haven't even put weaken. This is no debuffs on the boss. The only thing that this doesn't take into account for is if the boss has strengthen, right? Or it has some sort of ability to reduce the incoming damage. You know, obviously if it's poison cloud out, it's not going to do it, it's going to weak hit. But take that all into account. If it was a normal hit, there was no strengthen, it's going to do this much damage. Now let's apply some multipliers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to book him. His A2 has got a 20% damage boost. That's going to put us up to 511,000. Then we're going to put our basic masteries that we put on for boss killing, which is Heart of Glory, which means that we get 5% when we're attacking on full HP, single out when an enemy is on low HP, and bring it down when they have a big maximum HP. So these are like the standard multipliers you put on a boss to boost the damage. We've got up to 614,000. Now let's put weaken on the target. We're now up to 768,298. So all we've done is apply what I would call the basic setup of a champion. You built them, you booked them, and you put weaken on the enemy. And now we're dealing 768,298 on that A2 on an AoE without any of his passive. Now let's apply some crazy numbers. Let's put the fact that all of those enemies are under HP burn. We've got an AoE HP burn out. Now we're dealing 1.1 million damage. Let's put a 5th skill on here. This is the first major multiplier. So we're now going to attack with the A2's 5th attack, which boosts our damage by 200%. That's going to put us to 3.4 million damage overall. This is still on the worst AoE setup. Now let's attack decapitated heads. When we have heads decapitated, all of our damage is increased by 200%. But also all of the hex damage is increased by 200%. So you're getting double the bonus on the hex because essentially the first hit is taking 200% bonus and then 10% of that is going to get 200% as well. So technically the hex is getting 400% bonus because it's getting the 200 from the original attack and then the 200 from the hex component. So when we put decapitation on, say like we are attacking an enemy, the setup would basically be 4 decapitated heads, all of them with hex, all of them with HP burn. We're going to do 11.5 million damage on the worst AoE setup in this build. Now, there's also an opportunity for you to run different artifact sets. You don't need Savage Lethal here. It's not a requirement because you're doing true damage. If you can set it up correctly, you could go for Fury. If you can get him to be low HP, that would be 50%. That would push us up to 17.3 million damage. Now, obviously, Heart of Glory, you would swap it out for Grim Resolve because you're on lower HP. You can do that. That's not a problem. But now we're at 17.3 million on the worst setup in this average build. Now, if I change it from Suffering to non-Suffering, we're at 22.2 million. This is one ability when you've used it on the 5th ability. 22. This will do to a single Hydra head 4.7 million damage. That will one-shot everything but the Suffering head in one go, assuming you've got that. Now, we don't have all of the possible multipliers. For example, Firol, the Barkhorn, has just come out. If there's 4 buffs on your allies, you're going to get 20% bonus damage. So let's add that in. That's now 26.7 million. Maybe you're using Ruel as your Hex champion. Ruel increases the enemy's damage when a Hex target is attacked by 10%. Let's add that back in. Now we're at 29.3 million. Maybe you've got a triple buffer in 9 out of 9 protection. Every single buff that champion is going to place is going to increase your damage by 5%. So if we place 3 buffs, we get a 15% bonus. We are at 33.8 million damage in one ability. This is why I was getting excited about Rathalos Blademaster. Now, I will put a reality check here and go, look, this is stars-aligned theory crafting. If I get all of my things in line, if I'm at low HP and I've got Firol and I've got this and I've got that and it's all lined, then I might be able to do it when I've hit my 5th skill. I agree that this is stars in line, but I'm showing you the maximum ceiling, right? This is kind of like what a Trunder can do. I did some math along the right-hand side here if we were to take similar damage, and I worked out a Trunder A2 can do somewhere in the region of sort of 25 to 39 million damage, depending on the build that she was in. So he's not going to beat Trunder because Trunder's consistent on that A2. But in terms of an actual raw damage output in Hydra, this is obscene. It's super, super strong. Now, if we pull this back and we say, okay, well, what if we single target? Is it a lot worse? Well, it's still 20.7 million on a single target. He will attack an enemy in this setup, assuming he has Firol, Ruel, protection set bonuses. He's at Fury. Let's take Fury out because that's probably the hardest thing to implement. If we take Fury out and we actually have a decapitated head with a 5th skill animation, the 5th skill proc, HP burn on the target, all the basic books and masteries, he will hit that single head for 7.2 million damage. These numbers are some of the craziest numbers. These are numbers you would expect to see with a Taras, with a Trunder. These aren't champions you would see with Whisper. Whisper can't reach these numbers. Now let's put it back to something a little bit more realistic. Let's put it right back here and let's just reset our stats. Let's put a build that maybe you could get on your starter account, right? A lot of people are going to be pulling Rathalos. They may not have all this crazy gear and all these different things to set up. So let's just go with a standard 4,000 attack, 150% crit damage, right? A pretty average, okay build, nothing crazy. It's probably more advanced than a free-to-play can get if they started with a free-to-play, but what I would call a good starting point. 4,000 attack, 150% crit damage. We always can count on the buff because we'll have that buff available to us from the A3. And let's just take the aura out. Let's just say we need the speed aura to make this work. So even unbooked, with all of the masteries and multipliers disabled, with all of the different things enabled here, we're going to do somewhere between 119,000 versus 199,000. So single target will do less damage here because we don't have the multipliers in effect. A lot of the single target damage comes from the bonus from Hex and the multipliers you can do on Hex. So we're still doing 119,000 on that A2 every single time we A2. It's always going to be somewhere between 199,000 to 109,000, 119,000 here on that A2 with 4,000 attack and 150% crit damage. Now, if I just do what I would expect most people will do, which is, again, give him some basic masteries and set him up, right? If you started with Mordecai, like I've done on my free-to-play, this is how you would set him up. You try and find a weakened champion, and you'd set it up like this. That is going to do 324,000 damage on one A2, with 4,000 attack and 150% crit damage. That's really good for a new Hydra build. If you're just like trying to get some Mithrala fragments, this is as good as having a HP burn, because a HP burn can only do 50,000 every single time it's activated, right? So it's a bit limiting. Now, if we actually add the 5th skill, the decapitation, now we're up to 4.2 million damage at 4,000 attack, 150% crit damage. When we attack a decapitated head and all the other heads are decapitated, 4.2 million on this build, you know. And if we actually had a Feral, maybe we got lucky. Well, now we're at 5 million. When we add Ruel, maybe we got lucky. We're at 5.6 million. Maybe we did have protection. It's very unlikely. You haven't done Hydra Clash, but you see what I am saying. You do not need crazy stats to make this guy actually produce significant damage in Hydra. Significant. Because what we're doing when we're attacking a single target is we're applying 2.2 million damage to the single target, but we're actually getting 2 million damage from Hex. And Hex is pretty accessible because you can get it from the Curse set. There's lots of Hex champions out there right now. So it's pretty accessible to apply a Hex into your Hydra team, even in the early game. You will eventually, like early to mid game, you probably have enough to be able to stick a Hex out there. You might not have enough to kill an enemy, so decapitation is a very difficult thing to depend on. But even if you can't like attack decapitated heads, you're still doing 1 million damage. That is enough to get you to the 1 key. So this is why I wanted to showcase these numbers before I actually did a playtest in the video, in the actual stream, is because this is why I was getting excited. And a lot of people were saying, well, how do you know all of this because of the multipliers and everything else? My experience and the way that this game is coded, when I see certain things, when I read a skill set, I can tell you based on experience, knowledge, how the game's coded, how I know the multipliers are set, what I predict they typically do. I can tell you almost instantly from reading of the kit that it's either going to be good if the multipliers are really good or really, really high. I knew this guy, regardless of the multipliers, was going to hit really hard because we're talking multiplicative layering. It's a keyword that I want to use here. Multiplicative layering. There are so many multipliers that you can apply to him that he gets out of control. If you can keep finding ways to multiply his final damage output because he's multiplying it himself so much, it's quite crazy. So you can see right now, even just his kit with an increased attack, a really low build of 4,000 attack, 150% crit damage, is doing around about 972,000 to Hydra. It will give people options in Hydra. You can take him into Dragon and actually whack Dragon for some damage. Dragon 20, you might be able to take half of his health off of him in one attack. Now, obviously, trying to activate this 5th skill is very difficult, but even a single attack is 250,000 damage. It's a max HP hit. You can replace your Royal Guard with this guy, and he will do the damage. He will do the job, you know, in a very small build. So there you go, guys. That is the math breakdown of Rathalos. We will actually play test this and see if my math translates to reality when we put him into my gear, because I can push a lot higher than the numbers I've shown you here. I could probably get him to at least 7,000 attack, 300% crit damage without even breaking a sweat. I'd have thought if I put him in my best gear. I'm still trying to figure out what artifact sets are really good for him, because his A1 and his A3 are not actually ignoring defense, so is lethal and cruel still better? Perhaps we need to look towards merciless so we can get the reflex back to the A2 more often. You would want to run relentless more on him though, because it is like Gwendolyn. The more turns you take, the more attacks you do. The more attacks you do, the more skills you use. The more skills you use, the more you can get your 5th skill back. Counter attack will be very valuable to him. Ally attack, joint attack. These things are very interesting to add into a team, because if you can accelerate your way towards these big numbers, right? I'd imagine there's probably a Kraken out there that's sitting there going, well, I can do this, I can probably do that. I can probably give him this, and I can probably give him that, and I can probably put him in, I'll probably put him in Lethal Cruel. I can give him the Feral, maybe the Ruel's in there, and I'll give him some protection bonuses. And then I'll hit an AoE ability. There's probably a Kraken out there that's thinking, I can probably do that quite comfortably with an 8,350% crit damage build. 32 million. There's easily someone out there with the gear that can do that. So I'm really curious to see how it's going to work, if it's going to be, if this math is going to be reality. But I absolutely thought when I saw his kit that this is what potentially you could do. Multiplicative layering to get you some crazy Hydra damage and really push you in Hydra Clash. So we'll see if my math theory comes true. So if this is the first time you've watched a video on this channel, this is what I do. I deep dive into the numbers. I break down how everything works in the game. I explain it. One thing I just quickly want to do, a lot of people have been saying that, sending me messages about the fact that I said something like it's double damage. This is actually multiplying by 300% in this equation. You can see all of my multipliers in this equation up here are actually multiplying 1 plus. So we're adding 1 plus 20%, 1 plus 200%. So it's actually multiplying by 3. Decapitation is a multiplier of times 3. So I did want to clarify that just in case some people were looking at the math thinking you've not multiplied it correctly. I absolutely have. I know what I'm doing. This is what we do on this channel. We break down the math. We break down in detail. I will put a link in the card at the top left for the live stream that's going to be happening later tonight. We're going to be on about an hour before reset. We're probably going to have a look at Amius today because I have now unlocked him. We'll see what I can do with different teams, see if we can beat him straight out the bat. And then we will get straight into Rathalos. We will get him. We will build him. I'm going to make a clan boss team that I can hopefully just slot him into to see what kind of damage we can do in clan boss. And we'll see where we go from there. But there we go, guys. Let me know in the comments below, are you still excited for Rathalos? Do you disagree with my opinion that this guy is one of the best login champions we've ever had? Let me know why. I do read all your comments, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.